Hey, how's it going? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Gabby and today we're going to be doing my January wrap up. And in the month of January, I read a total of 22 books. For some reason, I feel like this was the month where I had some really unpopular opinions on some really popular books. I did end up having a few different DNFs this month, including Intermezzo by Sally Rooney. This was a book that I nearly got like 200 pages into before I decided to DNF. I was just kind of bored. I don't know what it is about Sally Rooney's writing, but I just do not connect with her writing. I also ended up DNFing House of Glass. This was one that I was trying to read during Winterween, and I want to say I got about 100 pages into this, maybe even a little bit more, before I decided to DNF. I also did temporarily DNF I Keep My Exoskeletons to Myself. This is a sci-fi book that I am very interested in reading, but I just wasn't in the right headspace, or like I wasn't in the right mood to read this one, so it is a temporary DNF. I got about 100 pages into this one. I do want to get back to this one at some point though. I did work on a number of different reading vlogs this month though, including my Winterween reading vlogs. I hosted Winterween again this year. It was so much fun. If you missed any of those reading vlogs, I did 3 for Winterween. I will have them all linked down below. I also did some videos that were very fun this month that was like reading popular books from 2024 from the Goodreads Choice Awards, and that was really fun. I discovered a new all-time favorite from doing that video. And then I also did a video where I explored more of the sci-fi nominations from the Goodreads Choice Awards, so that was a fun video. I also did have 2 different Patreon exclusive videos that I worked on this month. One of those was a video that was like 2024 favorites, and that included like movies and TV shows and music and food and like just a bunch of things. And then I also did do a birthday weekend vlog, kind of like a monthly vlog in Canada. They were both some really fun videos to make, so if you would like to join my Patreon, I will have the link down below. Before we do jump into the wrap up though, I would just like to take a minute to thank today's video sponsor, which is Book of the Month. Book of the Month is a book subscription service, and their mission is to bring the best new fiction forward. There are so many hundreds of new books coming out every single month, and it can be overwhelming trying to keep up with all the new releases, but that's why Book of the Month is awesome, because their team reads all the new releases and they pick the top few that they think you will be the most interested in. And so every month you have a selection of about 5 to 7 books to choose from, and they are always picking books in some of my favorite genres. Like there's usually always a great romance pick, a thriller pick. There's a variety of different genres to choose from, and they always have some of my most anticipated books of the whole year, including this month. It was actually really hard for me to choose this month, but I love Book of the Month because I'm always discovering new books that I've never even heard of before. And you can also get books early sometimes before they even publish for the rest of the world. I also love the fact that you do have the option to skip some months. If for some reason you're not feeling any of the selections that month, then you can skip and you will not be charged for that month. But I guarantee that you're not going to want to skip, because they always have some of my most anticipated books of the whole year as monthly selections, and I just get really excited. I don't know if you can tell, I just get really excited to see what the selections are going to be every month. It's just like a little surprise at the beginning of every single month, getting to choose a new book, and then it just shows up on your door in this beautiful blue box. Not to mention, Book of the Month has the best prices on new hardcover fiction books, because I guarantee if you go and walk into your local bookstore right now, you're gonna find a new hardcover book to be anywhere from like $28 even up to $30. This month, when you use the code CRUSH to sign up, you can get your first book for just $9.99. I'm telling you, that's an incredible deal. Less than $10. What an amazing deal. So let me tell you about the books that I got this month. One of the books I chose this month is Famous Last Words, and this one is a thriller that just sounds like it's gonna be very, very interesting and right up my alley. I always get excited whenever they have like new release thrillers as monthly picks. I also ended up going with First Time Caller, because this right here is one of my most anticipated romance books of the year. Oh my god, it just sounds like it's gonna be so cute and so my taste. I also just like absolutely adore this cover. Like, do you see how cute this is? And look at the spine. Oh my god, it's adorable. And just a reminder that Valentine's Day is coming up, so it wouldn't be the worst idea to consider Book of the Month as a gift for your partner, because they do offer 3, 6, and 12 month subscriptions. So you could get your partner a Book of the Month subscription for Valentine's Day, just throwing that idea out there. And as I mentioned, you know, like there were so many great picks this month, it was actually very hard to choose. So if you want to use the link down below to sign up for Book of the Month, I highly recommend it. Book of the Month is a book subscription service that I've been working with for years, and I just really, really love working with them. I have an entire shelf dedicated to all of my Book of the Month books, and I just love to see that collection grow. Every time I can add new books to that collection, it makes me so genuinely happy. Thank you so much to Book of the Month for sponsoring today's video, and now let's get into the wrap up. Okay, so I figured we would do this wrap up the same way that I've been doing them last year, where I start with the worst thing that I read and then we work our way up to the best thing that I read. I feel like this month was a very mixed bag for my reading, especially considering I read The Boyfriend by Frida McFadden and I gave it 1 star, and it was like one of the first books that I read this year. And I think, you know, I've learned my lesson. I think that Frida McFadden is just an author that is really not for me, but I know that she's a very popular thriller author, so I do get a little bit curious, you know, about reading her books and wondering like why they're as popular as they are. But this is a thriller that for me, it brought absolutely nothing new to the table, and it was actually very frustrating to read because I feel like this is one one of those thrillers where like the protagonist is just so naive and just kind of dumb sometimes. And it is one of those stories where you are following like a dual timeline. Like you're getting her perspective in the present day, and then you're getting the perspective of this young teenage boy in the past. And in her present day, you know, like there's kind of like a dangerous situation where there's like a crime and then there's like a detective involved. And it's just, I don't know, I feel like I've read a ton of thrillers like this one. I feel like this protagonist was so incredibly frustrating to read because she just kept making dumb decision after dumb decision. And so yeah, I ended up giving this one 1 star. I really do not like it. I do not recommend. I just don't really understand why Freida McFadden is so popular, because I guess like her books are easy to read. You know, like they're very easy to read. They're very quick to get through. But I just think that there are so many better thriller writers out there. So I don't really get the hype with this author. Another 1-star book that I had this month. I mean, yeah, I had 2 1 stars already this year. I rarely ever give out 1 stars, I swear. But another 1 star that I had this month was actually 12 Nights at Rotterhouse. This one, unfortunately, it just had to be a 1 star for me. I mean, this is a horror book that I was really looking forward to. Oh my god, this book was just such a hot mess. Like, it was just so boring. I thought the premise for this one sounded really cool because we were going to be following this guy who's a writer, and he was going to be going to stay at this place called Rotterhouse, and he wanted to stay there for 13 nights. And it was like his mission to write a book about this place called Rotterhouse, and he wanted it to become like the next big famous haunted house. But like this story is literally the most boring reading experience I've had in a long time. Like, it's literally just this character going to this house and just like describing his experience while he's there. But of course, it's like, it reads so pretentious because like this man doesn't even believe in ghosts or like anything paranormal. So like most of the book is just him like explaining horror tropes and like why this horror trope works and why this doesn't. And it was just so freaking boring. And then I had to give this 1 star because I thought the ending was so ridiculous and so unsatisfying. I was like, what is this ending? Like, are you kidding me? It was just so abrupt and I just didn't care for it. I didn't like anything about this book, so I had to give it 1 star. And then a book that I sadly ended up giving 2 stars this month is A Killing Cold by Kate Alice Marshall. You have no idea how much this kills me that I didn't love this one because I was such a big fan of What Lies in the Woods, but this book just really didn't do anything for me. I mean, it sucks because the beginning of this book I thought was really interesting, and I really do like the setup of this. We're following this woman who like gets involved with this man, and then he's gonna be bringing her to meet his family, and his family like basically like owns this mountainside, and there's like a snowy atmosphere. You know, it's definitely giving all of the winter vibes in this one, which I did like the atmosphere in this a lot. And it mostly takes place on this isolated mountain where it's like snowy. So the atmosphere in this book was really great, but I just feel like, oh my god, like I'm so tired of reading thrillers like this. Like, there are so many thrillers that read exactly like this book, and this one just really didn't bring anything new to the table for me. Like, it was just like, I've read this before. And maybe that's just me getting like really tired with the thriller genre in general, but also like this protagonist was just so frustrating to read after a while because it's like, how many times are you gonna bring up your past? And it was just annoying. I don't know. I was just very annoyed with this book by the end of it, so I had to give it 2 stars. I just didn't really care for it. And then here's where I come in with my first very unpopular opinion, because I ended up giving Witchcraft for Wayward Girls 2 stars. And this is like the new Grady Hendrix. You know, like I went into this pretty excited for it because Grady Hendrix is a writer that I just really enjoy usually in the horror genre. I feel like for me, this book read a lot more like historical fiction than horror, and historical fiction is just not always a genre that I personally vibe with. I also think when it comes to reading about witches, for some reason, it's usually like very hit or miss for me with witches. I don't know why. Sometimes I can find witches to be a little bit boring, and I think that's because sometimes it can read a little bit more fantasy than what I like reading. So because this is a story about these like young pregnant girls who start to discover witchcraft, I just think that this one just wasn't really for me. Like, I should have realized that going into this, that like, oh, these things are not necessarily things that I enjoy reading about, so I feel like I should have lowered my expectations a lot for this one. But I don't know, for me, I was very bored for most of the story because I feel like the pacing of this is so slow, and like there's not a lot happening in this book. And I see so many people saying that the ending of this book just packs an emotional punch, and I just really didn't feel that way. But I also think it's because I never felt emotionally attached to these characters at all. So I don't know, for me it was around 2 stars, and I'm so bummed that I didn't love this one the way that I thought that I could. One of the books that I read during Winterween was Ling Hun, and this one is a horror novella. This one is kind of hard to describe, to be honest, but it is described as like a modern gothic ghost story. And this book is actually set in the mysterious town that's called Home. And in this town, the dead can live again as spirits. And so we're following this one family, and we're following this young girl, and she's just recently lost her brother. And so this story is a lot about the grief that this family in particular is going through because of the loss of her brother. I don't know if maybe it's just because I'm a little bit burnt out, I guess, right now on grief horror, but I just didn't really connect with this one as much. I don't know, there were some moments where I was like, oh, the writing is like really good here, and I love the way that this author described and grief. There's also like 2 random short stories included at the very end of this book, and I just really didn't think it was necessary to include those. I don't know, I have mixed feelings on this one overall. I ended up giving it 3 stars. And then we have my BookTube book club pick for the month of January, which was Dark Places by Gillian Flynn. And this is one that unfortunately, I think I'm also giving this one around 3 stars. The live show for this book just happened recently, so I will have the link in the description if you missed the live show. I think this is a book that was really tough for me to read, you know, because like the title implies, you know, like there are some very dark and disturbing things happening in this book. I mean, you know, gosh, like the general premise is that we're following this young girl who was like the only survivor in like a mass murder. Like her whole family got murdered right before her eyes when she was like a little girl. And then she believes that her brother is the one who was responsible for doing this. And her brother has been sitting in prison for like 25 years. And now the story is taking place 25 years later, where she's starting to put together more of the clues and thinking like, oh, maybe my brother wasn't the one who was responsible. And we not only get Libby's perspective, like the young girl, we get her perspective in the present day. We follow the brother's perspective in the past and also the mom's perspective in the past. And so like there was a lot going on in this book, but I do think this book is one of those books that makes you feel so depressed and so like icky after you finish reading it. Like it is just really sad. Like there are so many things in this book that are just hard to read, and also like there are some animal like abusive scenes that are just very, very hard to stomach. And I just had like the worst feeling in my gut after finishing this book. Like I just didn't love that. It's hard for me to rate something like this because I do think that the ending of this book was surprising in some ways. Like there were definitely some things that I didn't see coming, but I also didn't think that the ending was very super satisfying either. Like I think there was a few things they could have touched on at the end. So like overall this was around 3 stars for me, which is unfortunate, but at the same time I'm so glad that I finally read this because now I can officially say I've read everything from this author, like finally after all these years. And then another very unpopular opinion that I had this month is that I'm giving 3 stars to The Favorites by Lane Fargo. I think that this one is an unpopular opinion because I've been seeing everyone, and I mean everyone, giving this book 5 stars and just absolutely loving it, which like I'm so happy for everybody because I really wanted to love this book with that kind of passion. This was definitely one of my most anticipated books of the year because, you know, Lane Fargo is the author of They Never Learn, which is a thriller that I just absolutely love. And this is one that I thought would be so cool because you're basically reading about figure skaters and it's like an epic love story through the years of their careers. But it definitely reminded me of Daisy Jones and the Six, you know, because like it's that kind of storytelling where there's like interviews and it's talking about like their legacy and like their careers and like the drama in their lives that happened throughout the span of their careers. I just wanted to love this so much, but I feel like for me, I did not care about the romance that was happening in this book. Like I just really didn't care for them together and I didn't feel any chemistry, and I feel like that played a huge role in why I didn't end up enjoying this book as much. There were some things about this book that I really did like, and I love the fact that it kind of felt like a mix of like Challengers and like I, Tonya and like some of these things that I've just loved in the past, but I feel like I didn't love this book nearly as much as I loved any of those things. I guess I just wanted to feel a lot more emotionally invested in this than I ended up feeling, and by the ending of it I was just like, yeah, like I don't know, that was fine. Like I just don't really get the hype with this one and I'm so sad about it. Another thriller that I read this month that I'm devastated is only 3 stars is The Last Session by Julia Bartz. This one is actually an ARC copy that I have. This book doesn't publish until April 1st, but this is a thriller that I was really looking forward to because Julia Bartz is the same author as The Writing Retreat, which is like one of my all-time favorite thrillers, and this is the 2nd book she's ever published. And this is one that, oh my gosh, at the beginning of this book I was so into it. It sounded so interesting because we're following this character named Thea who works in the psychiatric unit in a hospital, and they bring in this woman who looks exactly like her, and she's kind of like, oh, like what the fuck, like that's weird, like why do we look so identical? And then after starting to get to know this woman just disappears from the hospital, and so it's kind of about how she's trying to track down what's happening with this woman and why they look so alike. It also involves her going down to New Mexico, and she kind of gets involved in this place that feels a little cult-ish, and that's where I was kind of nervous for this book because I was like, you know, I don't always love reading about like culty things in thrillers. Like it's one of my least favorite tropes in a thriller, but with this one I was having a lot of fun with it up until the very ending. I feel like after around 200 pages into this book, like oh my god, it just started to get so repetitive. The pacing of this book is definitely what killed me because it's just so slow paced and it takes a long time for anything to really happen in this one. The direction that this book ended up going in wasn't my favorite. And it's a bummer that this one only ended up being 3 stars, but I will still read anything that this author writes because there is something about her writing that is so addicting. Like once you get into it, it's really hard to put her books down. I also ended up giving 3 stars to Beautyland, and this is a sci-fi book that I read that I thought was very interesting because we're following this protagonist, this little girl who believes that she's an alien, and it's kind of unclear to us, you know, as the reader, if she actually is an alien or if she just thinks that she's an alien. But then the story's about how like she ends up getting this fact fax machine, and she thinks that it's her responsibility to send messages to her alien family about like the weird things that the Earth people do. And so I do think that this book was like incredibly entertaining for those reasons, because I do love books like this where like you're following from the perspective of a character who's like observing humanity like from the outside basically, and kind of like judging all the like little weird things that humans do. But I think my issue with this book is that it read a lot more like a literary fiction kind of like coming of age story as opposed to sci-fi, and I was just hoping that this book would get a lot more weird than it ended up getting, because oh my god, like the potential, this book just could have gotten so weird in the end and I would have been so here for it, because I feel like this book does play it kind of safe. It does read like a typical kind of like coming of age kind of story, which I did like, but at times I just got a little bit bored with it, you know, like I just wanted a little bit more out of the plot of this. I also ended up reading Wake Up and Open Your Eyes, and this is a new release horror novel that I was so excited to read, mostly because the back premise of this says that this is a social horror novel about a family on the run from a demonic possession epidemic that spreads through media. And then it also said for fans of The Last of Us, and I was like, oh my god, I love The Last of Us, like that's one of my faves. And this one definitely is a pretty intense social horror novel. Like this one, the commentary is a little bit like on the nose, because you know, we're following this protagonist Noah who is watching as his parents are getting completely brainwashed by the news. They watch this channel called Fax News, that's like FAX, and it's basically like, you know, commentary on like Fox News and how Fox News is trying to like manipulate people. And you know, reading this during this time of like the America that we're currently living in right now, yeah, it felt a little bit crazy, you know, like it felt like I was going crazy, because like I do think that the commentary in this book is very strong, and I do fully support the message that this author is trying to send with this book, because I do think that this commentary is unfortunately like really needed right now. I think this book was so scary because of how realistic it felt in a way, you know, because like that's really scary. Like clearly we're seeing this happen in our real lives, like people getting brainwashed by shit they see on the news. And so reading this at this time definitely added an element of like fear to the story for me. There were some moments, especially in the beginning, that I just thought were so creepy and like so well done, especially with like the TV just like turning on by itself and like it will stop at nothing to get this message to these people. And there was a lot of scenes with this guy and his mom, like, oh my god, what the fuck? Like, ew, creepy scenes that I will never forget. But I think for me, there is no reason why this book needs to be nearly 400 pages long. Like for me, the story started to get so repetitive, especially like in the second half. I was so ready for it to be over, and I do think this is one of those stories that would work a lot better as a novella. And from what I've heard, I think somebody has mentioned that this was originally published as a novella and then he turned it into a full-length novel, which I do respect that choice, but I also feel like this probably just would have worked better as a novella, because I just think this is too long. I do appreciate the message in this book. I ended up giving this one 3 stars overall. All right, and then one of the romance books that I read this month was Unromance by Erin Connor, and this is a romance book that I was so excited, like I was really looking forward to this one, because this is a romance that follows this girl who's a writer. We have this girl named Sawyer Green, and she is a romance author, and she's currently like working on her next book, but she's like struggling with inspiration for her romance novel. And then we're also following this guy who's an actor named Mason West, and he is recently dealing with like a very public breakup, and he like needs to take a break from romance in the eye of the public. And so one day they happen to meet each other by chance in an elevator, and then they decide that they want to try and like ruin romance for each other. They want to start to go out with each other so that she can get inspiration for her next book, and then he wants her to like ruin romance for him so that he like stops falling in love with like every girl that he meets, basically, because he's having a clear problem with romance right now. And so it is kind of like cheesy, but it's like a fun little setup of like they're gonna try to ruin romance for each other, and it's so cute. I love that this book takes place in Chicago, by the way. Oh my gosh, like the vibes were great. And even though this book has some tropes that I don't usually love in romance, like for example, this book starts off with like a one-night stand between them, and I usually don't like that, because like I like the tension to be a little bit more of like a slow build. And I will admit that at times it did feel a little bit insta-lovey because they like hook up with each other right away. But I also think like, I don't know, these two had some really cute banter, and I really loved both of their characters as individuals, and I connected with both of them, which doesn't always happen for me in romance books, so I really loved that. And oh my god, if I had one complaint, this is such a like nitpicky thing, but on the audiobook, I was listening to this one on audio, I did not like the male narrator, because we do get both of their perspectives on the audiobook. Bro, what the heck? Like, why did he sound like he was like a teenager or something? Like, I don't know, his voice on the audiobook sounded very young, and in my opinion, it didn't really like match his personality very much. and I hated the way that he did her voice on his chapters. Like, oh my god, I couldn't stand it. So like his perspective on the audiobook almost ruined this reading experience for me. So I don't think I would recommend the audiobook for this one. I think I would recommend reading it physically because the audiobook was not that great. So that's a bit of a bummer, but I ended up giving this one 3.5 stars overall. I think there were some things that I really wanted more from in this romance, but overall I really did love these characters, and I think that this one is a debut from this author, so I will definitely be reading more from this author in the future. All right, and then one of the horror novellas that I read during Winterween was It Waits in the Woods by Josh Malerman, and this one was so good. It was so creepy. I ended up giving this one 4 stars overall, and this one's really fascinating because it's one of those like Amazon short stories, so it's literally like 50 pages or less, I think. And this is a story about this woman who like goes into the woods because she's trying to save her sister who disappeared a few years ago, and then there's this like creepy ass monster demon thing like that's in the woods, and the audiobook literally jump scared me. Like, oh my god, if you have the chance to listen to this one on audio, I highly recommend it. It is so creepy. But yeah, this was 4 stars overall for me. I'm really loving these like little short stories that Amazon's doing. I think they're really cool. And then the next thing that I read this month was this graphic novel called 49 Days. This is one that I just checked out from my library because I thought the artwork in this looked really cool and I loved the different color palettes. And this graphic novel was very simplistic, but it was also very touching because the meaning behind the 49 days is that in Buddhist tradition, they say that a person's soul after they die is in transition for 49 days. And so in this story, you're following this young girl who has died, and then you're kind of following her over the 49 days as her soul is transitioning. And this one, like, I don't know, the artwork was very simplistic and it was a very quick read, but it was also very effective. Like, I almost felt myself cry at the end. Like, there was just something about the ending of this book that was just so stunning. And like, this book has a really beautiful way of looking at grief. And I don't know, I really enjoyed my time reading this and I gave it 4 stars. And then one of the books that I read during Winterween was Rotten Tommy by David Sodergren. And this book was so fun. Oh my god, this book was like a freaking roller coaster to read because this is a horror novel from the same author as The Har. And you know, The Har is like one of my favorites. David Sodergren is quickly becoming like one of my favorite horror authors just because I love the way that he writes. Like, his books are so easy to get into. And this story in particular was really creepy for me because it involves one of my favorite horror tropes where like there's like a creepy children's show that like nobody really remembers. Nobody remembers it. And our protagonist, she's the daughter of one of the actresses who was on the show, and she has like the tapes of the show, like the old tapes. And like, dude, this book was just so creepy. Oh my god, like this is one of those books where I was reading it late into the night and then I was like scared to like go out into the hallway to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night because I was thinking about this Rotten Tommy thing. Oh my god, it was just so creepy. It was so weird. And this book, like, oh my god, I was obsessed. Like, in the first half of this book, I was convinced that it was going to be a 5-star like new all-time favorite, but then the second half of the book, I don't know, some of it got a little bit like silly for me. Like, it started to feel a little bit more campy, which I don't mind, and I do think that this author does a really great job at like balancing kind of like a creepy story with like a campy story, but I just wanted it to get a little bit more creepy at the end instead of leaning more into the campiness. So I ended up giving this one 4 stars overall, but like, I will definitely never forget my experience reading Rotten Tommy. Like, it was so crazy. And then next up, I ended up reading Yours for the Taking by Gabrielle Korn. This is one of the books that I read for the sci-fi vlog that I was working on this month, and like, oh my gosh, the sci-fi has been going so well for me this month. I know I didn't make a 2025 goals video this year, you might have noticed, and I think that's because for 2025, I just kind of want to like see where the mood takes me, you know? Because honestly, like, I'm starting to feel a little bit like burnt out on thrillers at the moment. Like, I'm starting to get to a point where I'm like, oh my god, like, have I just seen it all? Like, nothing feels like it's impressing me, and I'm just getting really tired. So I feel like it would be best for me this year if I tried to read slightly less thrillers and maybe read a little bit more sci-fi. Because as you might have noticed from my sci-fi vlog, the sci-fi has been going very well for me recently. This story though was particularly fascinating because this one is a kind of futuristic, like, it takes place in the year 2050, so like not too far in the future, but we're following these characters who are living on, you know, planet Earth, but at this point climate change has like affected the planet so much that it might not be safe, you know, to live on Earth for too much longer. So these characters are trying to find a solution for that, and you're following one of the characters is this woman named Jacqueline, who is this reclusive billionaire, and she is a feminist and she has a plan for what she's going to do to like save some of the people living on Earth. And so you're following different characters who are experiencing what's going on in this universe. I mean, one of the characters you're following is this woman named Ava, and she's basically like applying to like get into this program. But then I also like that you are following 2 other characters who are more involved with like working with Jacqueline. Like, you're following her assistant, and then you're also following this medical student who starts working for her. And I also really like that in this story you're following a big cast of characters that are all very diverse, because her assistant that we're following in this book is trans. And I like that this book has so much commentary on not only like feminism, but then also like white corporate feminism, and how sometimes when you're like a white rich woman, that might kind of skew what your idea of feminism looks like. Then I also love that in this book there was so much commentary about like trans people and like non-binary people, and so much conversation around gender in general that I thought was very interesting and very well done. I almost thought, you know, towards the end of this book that the commentary got a little bit too heavy-handed, but I really loved this so much. And it's crazy how like you can read the full description of this and it doesn't really tell you what this book is actually about, which I think is really cool. Like, I love when a book can still surprise you in that way, so I had a great time with this. I gave it 4 stars and I will absolutely read everything that Gabrielle Korn comes out with in the future because of how much I love this. I also ended up reading Orbital by Samantha Harvey this month. This is one that I don't even know how to properly review because I feel like in this book you're not really attached to the characters, and I don't think that you're supposed to be. You're just following these 6 different astronauts who are currently traveling through space, and you're just kind of following their journey as they do that. But it's a very thought-provoking and interesting look at humanity. I've seen people describe this book as being like a love letter to Earth, and I definitely think that that's the kind of vibe. There are so many beautiful quotes. Like, oh my god, if you want to hear some of the quotes in this book, I would highly recommend watching the Sci-fi vlog that I just posted because I read so many of them. And this book just really moved me and like impacted me emotionally. It's just one of those books that is so beautiful and thought-provoking. And I think this is definitely one of those books that you can really take your time with, you know, because even though this is only 200 pages, I feel like this book has so much to say and like there's a lot to digest and like think about with this book. So I love this. I gave it 4 stars, and it sucks because I think this book had the potential to be like a 5-star new all-time favorite if I had just connected with the characters a little bit more. I loved this. I will definitely be highly recommending this for anybody that wants to get into sci-fi because this was just so interesting. And then speaking of more sci-fi, I also read Ministry of Time this month, which this is a sci-fi kind of romance book. I know this book is so hard to describe because it feels like a lot of different genres in this one, but this book totally took me off guard and this was such a huge shock for me. Like, this kind of kicked off my journey of like wanting to read more sci-fi this year because of how much I loved this one. So in this story, you're following this woman who works for the Ministry of Time, and basically what they do is they pull people out of moments in history and they help them to time travel to the present day, and they're basically calling them expats. Like, they're people that would have died in their timeline, so like they're not messing with like the universe or messing with the timeline too much of things. But then it's a story about how this woman gets paired with this man who got pulled from like the 1800s, and she's gonna be like teaching him the ways of the modern world and like what's new. And like, it's just, oh my god, I loved this guy, Captain Gore. Like, he's so funny. Oh my god, like I just adored his character. I mean, you know, like I mentioned before, like that's just one of my favorite tropes, like the fish out of water, and like seeing somebody who's like observing humanity from like an outsider perspective, like somebody who doesn't understand the ways of the world and she has to like teach him. Oh my god, it's just so fun. But I also feel like this book was trying to pack like so many genres and so many ideas into one book that it does feel a little bit like discombobulated at the end. And like, I see what this author was doing and like I'm obsessed, but I also feel like it was a little bit like the tone of the book would shift very frequently and it would kind of throw me off. I don't know, I gave this one 4 stars overall, but I really loved this, and this definitely inspired me to want to read more sci-fi this year. Like, I don't know, it was such a fun time. I also ended up reading Cross My Heart by Megan Collins. This is one of the only thrillers recently that I've really enjoyed, and I'm so grateful to this book for reminding me why I still read thrillers, because for a minute there I was like, oh my god, like maybe it's just me and like maybe I'm just not really loving thrillers anymore. And then this one came along and I was like, oh shit, that's cool, like I can still love a thriller. And in this one, it's really cool because we're following this woman who has recently just gotten a heart transplant surgery, and then she starts talking to the guy that was like the husband of the woman whose heart that she received. But the cool thing is that this guy is actually an author, that she's like very familiar with his work, like she's read his books, and so she's kind of like a fan of him. And what I really liked about this book is that you are getting the emails that they're exchanging back and forth in between the chapters that are from her perspective. I also loved and appreciated how much Taylor Swift was brought up in this book. Like, that was definitely a positive. And this was just so fun. I feel like this author is really good at misdirection and like tricking you into thinking that you know what's going on and then you actually don't know anything. Like, that's definitely one of my favorite things in thrillers, and there was a lot about this book at the end that actually surprised me and I was shocked. Like, I didn't see it coming. So I ended up giving this one 4 stars. I think it's a really great time. Also ended up reading The Love of My Afterlife this month by Christy Greenwood, and this is a romance book that I've been so excited to read, so I'm glad that I finally made the time to do it this month, because this is a book that I've seen getting compared to The Good Place, which is a TV show that I absolutely love. Because in this story you're following this character who like dies right at the beginning of this book, and then she goes to the afterlife, and then while she's in the afterlife she meets this guy there for like 2 minutes, and she's like, oh my god, like who's that, whatever, and they almost have this like romantic encounter. And then after she has this encounter with this man, the woman who like works at the afterlife center, she offers her a deal that she can like go back to Earth for like only 10 days or something to try to find this guy that she had a connection with. And so the story's about, you know, like her going back to Earth and then like kind of slowly starting to realize like all the things that she took for granted about her life and shit. And it's just like so beautiful. Like, I don't know, I loved the story so much. Like I really connected with the main character Delphi. I thought she was freaking hilarious. Oh my god, I listened to this one on audio and like there was a few times where I was like cracking up while I was listening to it because it was just so cute. And like I loved the writing in this. Like I love the story. Like I love anything like this where like a character's died and then they come back to like the reality that they were living in. And the romance in this book was actually so good. Like I didn't think that I would like it that much, but I really did. Like I really enjoyed this one a lot. So I ended up giving this one 4 stars. Like I'm so glad that it ended up being a good time. And then the last 3 books that I read this month were all books that I ended up giving 5 stars, which I'm so excited that I had some major wins this month. One of those being this graphic novel that's called How to Be Ace. And this one says that it's a memoir of growing up asexual. And you know, if you didn't know this about myself, I actually do identify as asexual and I have for a few years now. But you know, asexuality is something that I didn't even know about or fully understand until I was much older. And so reading this really just like hit me emotionally because I do think that there are some unique difficulties with growing up as an asexual person because, you know, the world is just so obsessed with sex and with romance. And I think it can be really hard and really lonely, you know, to try to navigate those feelings as like an asexual kid when you're growing up and you're like, oh my god, like I feel so alone and like I feel like nobody understands me. And so reading this was like, oh my god, it was so emotional. Like I felt so seen by this. And I think that if you are an asexual person or if you just want to learn more about asexuality, I highly recommend reading this graphic novel because I do love the way that she kind of breaks it down in a way that'll be easier for people to understand. I like that she includes a lot of her own like personal experiences that she had while growing up and like through high school and college. It was just so relatable to the point where it was like painful for me at times. I mean, I didn't relate to all of it because, you know, asexuality is such a spectrum and like a lot of people have really different experiences with it. But for the things that I did relate to, like, oh my god, it hurt me. Like I really related to it. So I love this and I gave this 5 stars and I would highly encourage anybody to go and check out this one. Another book that I gave 5 stars to this month is Sky Full of Elephants, which I'm so glad. Okay, I'm so glad because this was a 5-star prediction for me and I'm so glad that it lived up to those expectations. And this book is absolutely fascinating. You know, it's kind of like a sci-fi book where we're following this guy named Charles, and Charles is a black man who is now living in a world that doesn't have any white people anymore. Like basically one day, all of the white people in the world woke up one day and they all decided to walk into the closest body of water and drown themselves. And like that's crazy, you know, like that is so wild. And in the story, it's so fascinating to follow this guy Charles, especially because in the old world, he was incarcerated at the time, and now the story is taking place a year after these events and he's a professor in the new world. Something that is really interesting in this story is that it's also about him connecting with his daughter who is biracial, and so she's half white and half black, and she had to witness basically like her whole white family like die at the same time. And so now that it's like a year after the events, it's about her, you know, reconnecting with her father and try to figure out why he was never a big part of her life. But like the dynamics between these two characters, oh my god, it was just so fascinating. He has really benefited from like the new world because he feels like he has a lot more freedom than he did before when white people existed. But then, you know, his daughter has like the opposite experience because she's biracial, and because she's half white, like she had some of the white privileges that existed in the previous world, and so she kind of like wishes things would go back to how they used to be. And it's just so interesting. Like this book has so much great social commentary on not only race but like how our society functions in general. Like it was just so fascinating to read something like this, and I loved in this book how you're getting both his perspective and her perspective. I just think it made the story so complex and so interesting, and like god, the ending of this book just like really moved me. Like oh my god, it was so well done. So like it had to be 5 stars. Like I just love this so much, and I highly encourage, if you're interested in reading this, I highly recommend to check it out because it's literally so good. All right, and then the last book that I wanted to talk about that's like my favorite book that I read this month has got to be Welcome to the Hyunamdong Bookshop. Oh my god. You know, I read this on my Kindle originally, and then on my birthday weekend, I literally went to Vancouver and I saw it and I bought it in Vancouver because I was like, I need to go back through this book and start like annotating in it so I can have it on my shelves forever. And I'm so glad that I did because I genuinely feel like this is going to be one of my top favorite books of this entire year. And this was the first book that I read this year. Like, oh, this is a very beautiful and heartwarming and inspirational story that I feel like this book just came into my life at the perfect time. Like, I don't want to overhype this, okay? Like, I don't, but I genuinely feel like this is one of those books that you can read and it can like greatly impact your life or kind of like change the way that you view the world or change the way that you view yourself in the world. I mean, this is a very kind of like quiet, subtle, you know, like literary fiction novel about this woman who owns a bookstore in South Korea, and it's just about like her everyday life of like owning this bookstore, talking about books in a way that's just like so beautiful. Like I love books like this that are about bookstores and about people who love books, you know, because like I love, there are so many great quotes in this book about how like books understand us in a way that people just don't, and like the comfort you get from reading books. Like oh my god, it was just beautiful the way that this was done. But I also think there are so many great quotes about life and about trying to find happiness in your life and trying to be satisfied with the life that you have, how all consuming and difficult it can be to constantly be like trying to compare your life to other people. This book was just such a great reminder that like life is literally too short for all that bullshit. Like you just need to live the life that you want, and like you need to find happiness in your day-to-day because you only have so long. It's just really a book that I will think about and I will come back to very often, which is why I'm so glad that I bought it and I have annotated the heck out of this. And I just love this so much. Oh my god, I highly recommend checking it out. It's just so beautifully written. All right, so those are all of the books that I read in the month of January. It was a pretty mixed bag, but I do think I enjoyed at least half of the books that I read this month. Like that's pretty awesome. And I did find a few new 5-star all-time favorites. So I am happy with my reading so far in January. I feel like this year is off to a great start. I would love to know, how many books did you read in the month of January? What were your favorites? Have you read any of these books that I just mentioned? And if you have, please let me know your thoughts on them. And also, if you missed it, I did mention in my January TBR video that I will not be doing a TBR for the month of February. I did talk a little bit about my February TBR in the January TBR video, so if you missed that video, I'll have it linked down below. But basically, in the entire month of February, I'm going to be working on this like massive video project for my 10-year anniversary, because in the month of February, I'm having my 10-year booktube anniversary, which is like so freaking crazy to even say that. And so because it's my anniversary this month, I'm going to be working on a really big video project for the month. So I will not be posting a TBR video for the month of February, but I did include some of my TBR plans in my January video. So I will have it linked down below if you want to see what I'll be up to this month. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I really appreciate it, and I'll see you very soon with another video. Bye!